Thank you so much for sticking with Daybreak. So Trevor had a great conversation and spoke to Ken. I would love to now introduce you to Professor Catherine Gashuda. She is a psychologist, just to help us understand the sort of domestic violence that we've been seeing, the numbers rising ever since the curfew, not only just the curfew, but the restriction of movement came to being, not just here in Kenya, but around the world. The pandemic has brought about domestic violence in our homes. Here in Kenya, we have about 45% of women, according to research, are physically or sexually or in one way or another abused. Out of that 45%, that number shows us that it is people between the ages of 15 to 49 years old. Professor Catherine, thank you so much for your time this morning here on Daybreak. Allow me perhaps to begin off with a general question. What are you hearing from people? As a psychologist, are you getting any cases for the past 2 months, 2 months being February, rather March and April? I want to say March and April, these 2 months. Are you hearing any unique cases that have come out because of the pandemic?
Yeah, there are very many cases of domestic violence. People coming together at home. They were not used to that before. And coming together and staying at home, because they had not dealt with the issues that they used to have before, it makes them become very tensious. And because of that, now they start becoming violent to each other. Yes, there have been a lot of cases of domestic violence in our homes. Right.
Professor, before we can continue with our conversation, do you mind just tilting your screen a little bit so I can see you even a bit clearer? If you could lean back rather. There you go. Okay, thank you so much, Professor.
Okay.
Yes, you were telling me about the sort of unique cases that you're hearing. Could you perhaps share one or two?
We are having cases of people fighting and also people quarreling and not agreeing in terms of how things need to go at home.
Right.
And especially, yes.
Okay, and here's the thing, Professor.
Not agreeing.
What are we seeing? What is the stem of the violence that we're seeing? Is it because of the lockdown and people having to be so secluded in their homes? Or is it stemming already from pre-existing issues in relationships?
The issues are coming from issues that have never been dealt before, because usually what people do is to run away from dealing with issues, and as long as they are going to work, as long as they are not at home, they can go their different ways and do their different things. But with the lockdown, you have to be together at home, and you have to face up to the issues that are at home. Whether it's about things that are required at home, the basic necessities at home, and you have to talk about them. But because they never used to do that before, now they are made now to face each other. But because they have never resolved the animosity and the tension between them, then what that does is that it becomes a volcano that eventually erupts.
Professor, what's the best way then to handle this? What right now can couples do at the moment? Because there's restriction of movement, there's nothing you can do with the quarantine that is there. You're sort of forced to stay in the same house together. What can couples do to sort of mitigate their personal issues during this time?
Couples need to know this is an opportunity they have to address their issues, and to also know that issues cannot be bigger than them, that they have what it takes for them to be able to resolve their issues. They just need to communicate with each other, address the issues, not attack each other, not personalize the issues, but address what issues there are between themselves and even in their own family. So I would say it's an opportunity that they need to utilize for them to be able to handle those long-standing issues that they have never addressed appropriately.
So, Professor, I hear you. They should address, they should effectively communicate. But what is that? How should they effectively communicate? How do you effectively address this? Because communication varies from couple to couple. Marriage varies from couple to couple. Household varies from one household to another. So what might work for one individual, for one couple, may not work for the other. So as much as we're saying we should look for effective ways to address and resolve domestic issues, what does that look like? Is it sitting down and talking, or is it bringing in someone else to be a mediator? What does that process look like?
We can take the two of them, as you have said. Number one, communication is where we isolate the issues. What are the issues that are giving us problems in our family, in our marriage? Is it finances? Is it about children and discipline? Is it about our in-laws, our parents? Is it about other matters between themselves? They need to isolate those issues, because many times what couples do is that they see the other person as a problem and not the problem as a problem. And once the problem has been isolated, then they can think about, then how do we deal with this financial issue? We are having limited finances, then let's see how we use the little finances that we have at this particular time. So when issues are isolated, then issues can be dealt with. Is it about parenting? Is it that we are having different styles of parenting? How do we synchronize our parenting so that our two types of parenting can work for this particular child? So when we focus on what is the issue, then we can be able to deal with that particular issue. But when you see your spouse, your husband, your wife as the problem, then you are not going to attack the problem, but you're going to attack your spouse. If they cannot be able to agree, then they need a mediator to come and help them to be able to look at the problem and resolve the problem. But they indeed have an opportunity to deal with their issues.
So, Professor, during this unique time, the cases you're hearing, is it more spouse-related or children? Who is more affected during this specific time? These 2 months, what are you hearing who is more affected, the spouse or the children?
The children get affected because of a marriage that is not working. So for the children, it's a secondary problem. But the primary problem is between the couples, because if the couples are able to deal with whatever experiences they are going through, then indeed they can be able to bring children on board in a much better way, in a much healthier way, without involving the children in a conflictual situation. Where a marriage works and works in a healthy way, in a functional way, where a marriage has rules and regulations that are guiding it and regulating it, certainly the children benefit from a marriage that is working, from a house that is able to expand itself to occupy the children and become a bigger, healthier house.
Okay, right. Thank you so much, Professor. Professor, let's talk about, I want us to specifically now focus on children. Are you hearing cases specifically of domestic or sexual violence based on children this past 2 months, March and April, moving away now from spouses, couples?
Yeah, there are issues of children, and especially sexual molestation. When you leave children at home, or when children are at home and children are not monitored and children are not helped to see how do they relate with each other, how do you treat your small sister, how do you treat your small brother, then eventually what happens is that the conflictual relationship or even taking advantage of a younger child really happens. So what is happening today is that the younger children can be beaten up. This is about power play, or even taken advantage of sexually. And many a times, parents don't realize that there is a child who is getting molested, because those are not issues that children talk about. They are the shame issues that children would want to keep to themselves, because they were told that this is tabia baya. So they stay with a sexual molestation that they cannot be able to report to the parents. Because even when in some situations where the children report to the parents have not acted in a way to support the children or even help a child to be able to fight.
Professor, at the end of the day, don't you not then say that, would you not say that this is a perfect time, this presents a perfect time for parents to sit down with their children now that we are home more often and talk to them about these things? Sexual education should start at home. Sexual education should start as early as 3 years old. Shouldn't this be a time that parents should now be sitting down and talking to their children? And because at the end of the day, as much as we are all quarantined, sexual violence from cases that we've seen doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from parents, those same parents, either your mom or your dad that you're quarantined with. It will come from a house help that you're also quarantined in the same house with. It will come from an auntie or an uncle who you're also quarantined with. In short, it comes from people who are physically and socially close to you. Now, in such a time when physically we are all in one place because of the quarantine, how do domestic violence victims survive this pandemic?
I would say that sex education should take place even before this time of the lockdown. But because now they have an opportunity as parents, they need to do that. And just like you have said, sexual molestation does not happen from a stranger, but it happens with those that the child is with. That is why there is a very high rate of incest in our Kenyan homes. And therefore, parents have an opportunity today to help their children to see how they can take care of the others within the household, and at the same time, how they discipline themselves when it comes to sex and having sex.
All right. And Professor, at the end of the day, when your child comes and tells you that I was touched in a wrong manner, as a parent, what is the best and effective way to respond to that?
Number one, that other people should not do to a child, like being touched inappropriately or being told things that are sexual and hurting and injuring to them. They should not allow that to happen. And that we should teach our children to know what do they need to protect in themselves. What do they need to guard? They need to guard their feelings so that they are not hurt. They need to guard their thoughts. They need to guard their decisions. They need to guard their boundaries. They need to know that they can take charge of themselves to particular extent as children.
Right, Professor. And how do you qualify domestic violence? Is it emotional? Is it physical? Is it financial as well? Because you find even in certain homes, the financial is also used as a form of abuse. Finances is used as a form of abuse. So how do you qualify domestic violence? Is it emotional or physical?
We have different types of domestic violence. It can be physical, that someone is being beaten. It can also be financial, that you are being denied the finances that belong to the family, which should be used for the benefit of everyone within the family. But it can also be spiritual, that someone is abusing you and using spiritual statements to tell you that you can be okay with whatever you are being taken through. And it is also emotional in all the situations, in that you get hurt, you get pained, you get frustrated, you get panicky, you get anxious, you get depressed. There are so many things that happen to you to a point of people becoming suicidal.
Right. Okay. Professor, now away from just the children and spouse now, I would love to take a look at the family setup in a more whole umbrella. You have the husband, the wife, and the children all at home. What is the best way that right now we should take a look at duties, roles in the house? How should that be divided?
The first thing that needed to happen from the word go, when the lockdown started, is for the family to sit together and look at the laws and responsibilities and the needs that are there in the home. What are the activities that need to be carried out? What are the home chores that need to be, and those home chores and other activities and tasks should be divided to different people at different times. And there should be monitoring of how those activities are being done.
Professor, it's easier said than done. We know our Kenyan household, we know our, in general, even our African households, where you find it is the woman who does most of the work. And now with house helps also being sent away home to be with their loved ones during this time, that responsibility solely falls on the woman, which then translates to her having now to share the responsibilities with her children. In some households, we know that in our own Kenyan household, that is easier said than done, where you say, you know, the husband will be in charge of this and this, the children will be in charge of this and this, the wife is in charge of this and this. Easier said than done, that, Professor.
It is easier said than done because, again, that is what brings about dysfunctionality in families. But for any family that would want to take care of everyone in the home and for things to run in a way that is going to be satisfactory to everyone in the family, people need to take the extra mile and sit down and plan. In a situation where everything is chaotic and it is the parent, one parent, like a wife or the mother, who is taking on board all the activities and tasks that have to be taken up and doing them with the children, it is a very unfair situation. And it doesn't help even the man. Because every man, every husband, they need to desire to have a functional home. And I want to appeal to our men and husbands out there to desire to have healthier homes. And the only way they can have healthier homes is if they lead the family in planning and making sure that things are done, or they are taking the lead in doing the activities together with the rest of the family members. They need to model for the children, model for the girl children, model for the boy children, because even them, they are going to start their own families, and they need to see that dad was there to teach them on how things need to be done. A total man, an African man, used to be an example to the children. And that total man, an African man, is where we need to go back to. The modern man has forgotten the ethos that used to be there in the African man who used to take responsibility and leadership and make sure that they are following through with the activities in the home without sitting down and watching people. Okay,
Professor, now here's another question. How should families handle stress during quarantine, during a lockdown? As a family, as a group, what's the best way families should handle stress during a lockdown?
There are many ways in which a family should and can handle stress and frustration. And one of the ways that they need to do that are those family discussions that people have. It doesn't have to be a structured discussion, but when they are seated and they are eating, they can talk about what is it that is happening and how, as a family, can we make sure that we are going to take care of ourselves, even in the aftermath of this lockdown. Discussing and talking about issues is one of the very important ways in which the families can take care of the stresses that emanate from the lockdown. The number two is that the leadership, and I'm talking about leadership where I'm talking about the parents as the executive, and also the bigger children. They should take care of the younger children, where people become responsive to each other. Who is it that is requiring support? Is it an old mother or an old father or grandfather? Are they requiring support? That people can be responsive enough in our families to make sure that those that are requiring support, they are going to be granted that support, and that responsiveness in our families is going to be a duty that people perform. The other thing is that our Kenyan families are very religious, whether they are Hindus or they are Muslims or they are Christians, then they should be using their spirituality to help them to be able to address the lockdown at this particular time. Their spiritual undertakings in all the faiths that can help families to make sure that they are conducting themselves in a way that is helpful to everyone and also taking care of the larger family. So spirituality helps a lot. The other thing is using the government guidelines to help members of the family to obey and to adhere to those guidelines. And the ones that are not adhering to the guidelines, like an adolescent who is not wearing the mask, that they can be reminded in a good way, in a gentle way, in a loving way, that they need to adhere and that everyone needs to adhere so that things can be better.
Right. And Professor, allow me to now come back to this one part that we should touch before I let you go, which is job losses. We're seeing households having to come to the idea of people either having to lose their jobs or having to get pay cut. But let's focus more on those ones who are losing their jobs. How should families, how should couples, especially a couple, handle the job loss, such as at a unique time like this with the pandemic? How should a couple handle one person's job loss?
Right. People are within the family so that they can assist each other. Say like a wife has lost a job, then the husband should help the wife to be able, because it's an emotional thing. It is a financial and an emotional thing and a social thing, because you go to work and now you're not going to be going to work because you have lost the job. Meaning that emotionally you need to be helped to deal with it. And if maybe a spouse is not able to help the member who is losing work appropriately, they can reach out to friends and other families that can help them to be able to deal with the loss of the job in a much more appropriate manner. When it is settled in the mind, now they can go to the other level to see what that means to the family and what bills are not going to be taken care of, so that they can visualize what needs to be cut down, or do they require support so that they can ask for support. I have seen people who are even appealing for support from government. And you can do that at a time like this. A time like this is like a time of war. And therefore, everyone needs to attend to every other person's need so that we can be able to coexist and support each other and come out of this particular pandemic in a much better way and a stronger nation and stronger families, as long as we are supporting each other. So people need to be helped to process the loss of the job, whether it is going to be a pay cut or it is going to be a total loss of job or a business. They need to be helped to process. And then after that, they need now to focus on what does that mean for the family and how are they going to manage their finances in a much better way so that they can be able to meet every need that is there in the family. And those that they cannot be able to meet, then they can look for external support to see how they can do that. And if they are having loans, they rush to the bank, they settle with the banks so that the banks can push forward the payment of the loans for them to be able to handle their financial strains in a much better way.
Right.
Families that are going to be responsive are going to handle this situation much better.
Right. Professor, I need to let you go. Perhaps my last question is exactly what you've just touched on, government support. As a psychologist, what support would you want to see coming from the government, not even just during this time, even moving forward? Senator Sylvia Kasanga, nominated Senator Sylvia Kasanga, has a mental health bill which is still collecting dust. It hasn't been passed in Parliament. What would you want to see the government do as a psychologist?
You have said it, Winnie. We would want as psychologists and counselors to see the implementation of the Counselors and Psychologists Act. That act was enacted in 2014 and it has not been implemented. If it is implemented, we have had a lot of disasters in this country, and counselors and psychologists have not been harmonized in their response to these disasters. But if we did that, we are going to see a different way in which the counselors and psychologists are going to be responding. So we are appealing to the government through the Ministry of Health, where the act is domiciled, the act for counselors and psychologists, that they act with speed and implement that act. And if that act is having some gaps, those gaps can be sorted out as we move along. What we are requiring is a legal parameter and a structure that is going to help counselors and psychologists to act and respond in a professional and legal manner.
Professor, lastly, could you just confirm this to me? Has the Ministry of Health reached out to you or the body of psychologists to see what best way we can handle Kenyans during this lockdown period? If any hotlines can stand by that Kenyans can call psychologists such as yourselves and people can talk to you. Has the ministry reached out to the psychology bodies, psychologists such as yourselves?
Yes, the Ministry of Health has done that. However, there has been a lot of disquiet among the psychologists and the counselors because they are not feeling like they are hearing clear messages to the counselors and psychologists in regard to what they are supposed to do. So if the method is going to be much clearer about how the counselors and psychologists are going to be involved, that will benefit the Kenyans much more because they are intense and deep psychological issues that are there in this country, even in the aftermath of this pandemic.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for taking time to speak to us here on Citizen TV.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
That is none other than Professor Catherine Gashuza. She's a psychologist just helping us understand how to survive these unique times. We want to take a quick commercial break. This is Daybreak. Stay with us.